everyone, and welcome to another webinar from Women in Tech Dorset. Today we have an amazing speaker. I had the pleasure of working with Julia directly a couple of years ago when I was completely lost and not having any kind of a sense of direction at some point. And Julia, alongside Alan, under Exceptional Difference, really helped create order in the chaos that I was in, and we were able to create a lot of difference in the company and set up a whole engineering department to thrive under their guidance. So I'm really excited for Julia to share her wisdom with us. So off you go, Julia.
Okay. Simi, thank you so much for inviting me, because it really gave me a chance to just really reflect back on my career and really think about what I've learned over the years. And one of the memories that I had that was just really vivid, I don't know why this one is so vivid, but I remember I was a young engineer, probably 24, 25, and we were going down to Gunner Air Force Base in Alabama. So Gunner Air Force Base was the first organization in the United States that ever did an assessment with the capability maturity model. And our team was going down to help them address their findings. And I was with my boss, Jim and Tim and Don, and we went to meet our sponsor, Colonel Barhart. And so we're in the commander's conference room with the big coffin-shaped table, and I'm really nervous. I look like I'm 12. I look like I'm as like Gidget. And so we all went to shake his hand and meet him. And when he shook my hand, I swear he almost broke every bone in my hand. Like, it hurt so much. I wanted to just like crumple into a pile on the ground. And it took everything I had to just sort of smile and shake his hand. And I mean, I know that he was testing me, and it wasn't the first time I was tested, and it certainly won't be the last. And it's just really hard to be a woman in a male-dominated field. So what I did in preparation for this talk was to really go through all the thoughts and the things that we talk about and really try and focus on the few things that I think are especially important for women engineers. So I hope that my insights are useful for you. So I have been blessed to have been able to work with some of the real titans of industry. So, Watts Humphrey in the United States, he's known as the father of software quality. He won the National Medal of Technology, which is the highest civilian honor an engineer can win. And I was able to work with him for 20 years. I worked with him up until a week before he died. And I've had other great mentors in my life. I've been so lucky to work at some really great organizations, the Software Engineering Institute, IBM, Union Switch and Signal, and they really gave me the opportunity to put myself in extraordinary experiences so I could really learn a lot and become a better engineer. And now I'm, teaching and mentoring and coaching, and that gives me an opportunity to mentor and work with a lot of phenomenal, exceptional engineers. So my current position right now is I'm the principal and CEO of Exceptional Difference. And if you want to see my bio, it's out there on our website here on the slide. So when I look back on my career, I realized that I could sort of view everything in terms of quests and boss fights. And so I don't know if you guys all play video games. I don't really actually play that much, but my kids do. And so, I've had to play them. I have two boys if I wanted to spend any time with them. But when you're playing a game, you get these sort of everyday challenges, these little quests that you have to complete. And as you complete them, you get incrementally better. But then after you complete a certain number of quests, you end up in a boss fight. And the bosses look like this. They're these big, scary monsters. And it's sort of like David and Goliath. You think you're going to lose. It's really scary. But if you win, not if, but when you win your boss fights, you level up. And when you level up, you get all kinds of new powers. You get new clothing, you get new armor, you get new tools, and you get new abilities. So it was useful for me to go back and think about what I've learned in terms of boss and quests. So one of the first boss fights that I ever had was when I became a new team leader. And so this was a project, it was a multi-million-dollar project over several years. And it was also a small contract within a much, much larger contract. And so when I got the position, I was really excited. You know, just very proud of myself, but I was also filled with angst. You know, I was really nervous, like, was I good enough? I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I'm like, I don't know that I can do this. I would worry about how I was coming across. You know, Steve and I were just talking about watching ourselves in the Zoom. Like, how do I look? And then I was worried about how, if people would find me credible. I was like, how am I going to establish my credibility? That used to be something I would worry about. But through that initial boss fight, the thing I learned was to focus on value, data, and conviction. So as a new engineer, as a new team leader, I knew that my responsibilities was to meet my obligations of engineering. And it wasn't just me as team leader, but these are the obligations that all engineers face. You have to be able to build a product that's valuable to your customer and your organization, a product or service. It has to be high quality. It has to work right. You have to deliver on time. You have to turn over every rock to go as fast as you can, and not just going fast for fast sakes, but going fast to provide value. And you've got to be an engineer. You've got to be objective. You've got to use data to make good decisions and learn. So what I learned from this first boss fight was to always start with value. And so value can be a really hard term to understand because, you know, the easy way to think about it is, you know, we always say quality is building the product right and value is building the right product. So you know that you have to build products or provide services that are useful to your customer, they enjoy using it, they solve problems that they didn't even realize they had. But value is a lot more than just a set of abilities. It's also a lens. It's sort of a mindset in how you see the world. So when I took over this new project, I had one member of the team who ended up being a real problem. His name was Steve, and I've never worked with anybody like this, but he had this inability to norm. So when we had our first meeting, he brought up this issue, and it was a valid issue. And we probably spent 30 minutes in that first meeting really going over the issue. And as a team, we came to consensus that it was a non-issue. Well, at the next meeting, when he came back, he raised the issue again, as if we hadn't even talked about it. And I started to notice that every time he had a concern, and even when the team would norm, he would undo it the next time we met. And so at first I was looking at that problem very internally. It was really bothering me. It was very annoying to me. It made it really hard for me to manage team meetings because he was very disruptive. And I didn't want to be rude and constantly be shutting him down. And so I felt really paralyzed for a little while there. But then I stepped back and I thought, well, what if I was a team member on this team? What would I want the team leader to do? And when I started to sort of look at the situation in terms of value, my responsibility as a team leader to create value for my team, the answer became clear. I knew I had to deal with him. And so I, talked to him. It was hard, but I had some very frank conversations with him. The situation got better. He eventually left the team, but it wasn't with hard feelings. Like, I'd worked with him on other projects after that, but it was just that first time. And so the thing that is so important about focusing on value is that value makes you look outward. When you otherwise, I think as women, we tend to look inward and we get in our own way. And so when you can focus on value, it just makes the answer clear. Hang on one sec. So that first boss fight of, being that team leader for the first time really leveled leveled me up. I really learned a lot. And I learned a lot from starting with value. Excuse me. Because not only did I have to deal with problem employees, I had to deal with a demanding customer. I had to deal with setting up a steering committee of some very high-powered people. So for me, it was a big jump in my abilities. And I've been team leaders. I've taken team lead jobs after that, and I've always incrementally improved. But that first boss fight and the focus on value was a really big lesson for me. I now teach the exceptional engineering, and I do a lot of mentoring and coaching. And one of the students that I had was a woman. She was a real powerhouse. She had just been newly promoted to a chief engineer. So she had about 200 people reporting to her. And even though she was the chief engineer, she told me that one of her epiphanies was that every time she would walk out of a meeting, she would take all the action items. Like, how many of us have been asked to take notes at the meeting, right? And this is another dimension of value. She was not putting enough value on her own time. And not only that, she also wasn't giving her team the opportunity to take these action items and improve. And so, it wasn't a big change. It was a little quest for her, but it did save her an hour or two every week. And when you think about an hour or two every week, week after week, month after month, that adds up to some real time, because she really was an amazing person. I was so impressed with her. So my advice is, let value be your guide, and the right decisions will be obvious. And sometimes the right decision is saying no or not doing something. It's not always, do this. Sometimes it's the right decision to say, no, you take that action, or no, you take the minutes. So my second big epiphany is data. And data is one that's really hard for me to talk about because I care about it so much. I wanted to be a math major from the time since I could remember. And even my 27-year-old son, he'll call me now when he's driving home from work, and we'll talk about math problems. Like, we like data. And one of the things I've seen time after time is when women lose arguments because they were just focusing on opinions. So you're in an argument and it's your opinion against somebody else's. And so whenever I'm mentoring women, especially, I'm always talking a lot about data, because if you can bring data to these arguments, it's not that you win the argument, it's that it changes the whole direction of the argument. Instead of talking about your opinions and who's going to win, you're now focusing on the data and what's the problem you're trying to solve. So it changes the whole dimension of what you're trying to do. So I'm always telling women that data, it is the most important tool in your toolkit. It's like armor to you. It can protect you. I always say you can bully me, but you can't bully my data. And then I can't help but go on and on about data because I love it so much, but it helps you learn. So, imagine trying to learn how to play golf if you didn't know where your ball landed, and you didn't get that feedback. How would you ever get better? And I like the golf analogy for engineering in particular, because it's really rich to the way engineers work. So, in golf, you might every once in a while, it's certainly going to be in the tail ends of a normal distribution, you might get a hole in one, right? But you're not going to try and emulate that, because your goal isn't to get a hole in one every time. That's not a realistic goal. You don't want to react to that one data point. You want to look back at the trends of your data and use that objective basis and that feedback mechanism to learn and get better. So one of the students that I was working with told me, he said, I used to think I had 20 years of experience, and I now realize I have 1 year of experience 20 times. So use data to learn. But then the other amazing thing about data is that you don't have to just look backwards with it. It can also help you look forward. It can help you forecast and project. Data helps you know and see reality in time when you can deal with reality. So for instance, if you look at data, it's going to tell you whether you have a schedule problem. And what happens now is most people don't look at the data. And by the time you absolutely cannot ignore the fact that you're behind schedule, you typically have very few options. But if you use data, you can see pretty early if you're going off track. And that gives you time to have lots of options. You have similarly with quality. You can see, you can use your data to know, are you on track to develop a high quality product? Or is this whole thing going to blow up when you get into test? So I feel like as women, and in general for everybody, but especially for women, that data is probably one of the most important tools in your toolkit. And then there's another really amazing thing about data, and that's when you marry data with engineering judgment, you get conviction. So people can really tell the difference between when you're paying lip service to something and when you really believe it. And so the first sale is always to convince yourself, because when you're convinced, that gives you the courage to do whatever you need to do. So, sorry. So when you have that conviction, I mean, how many times have there been where, there's an elephant in the room, but when you have conviction that you have to take action now because you know what's going to happen if you don't, that's what gives you the strength. We call it lighthouse courage, to tell the truth and make a positive difference. And as you get that courage and you get that conviction, that's what gives you the courage to step into the bright lights and take that next harder job, that extraordinary experience. And the really amazing thing about conviction and personal confidence is that they're like muscles. The more you use them, the easier it gets. So, the first time I had to have a tough conversation with a problem employee, it was really hard. But the next time it got easier. The first time I had to public presentation, it was really hard. But the more you do it, it gets easier. So the more that you step outside your comfort zone, the bigger and bigger and bigger your comfort zone gets. So I talked a lot about my boss fights and how it was able to help me to level up at various points in my career. But I don't want to underestimate the quests, the incremental learning, because people tend to overestimate what they can do within a week. When you're working and you're doing incremental improvement, you tend not to see the results. But when you go back and look back in a year, you can be amazed at what you can achieve in a year. So I challenge all of you to treat every project as an opportunity to build your experience and skills. The trick here is to be intentional about it. When you start a project, obviously, you want to provide value to your customer and meet your obligations of engineering, but think about it from a personal perspective. What do you want to get out of this project? Is this an opportunity for you to develop new skills? Is this an opportunity for you to expand your domain knowledge? Is this an opportunity for you to practice and enhance your leadership skills? Be intentional and explicit about what you want to achieve, because every project is an opportunity to build your portfolio and get stronger. And remember, it's just as important to learn from your failures as it is from your successes. Before we started, we were talking about Matthew Syed, and he wrote a book called Black Box Thinking. And it's one of my favorite books. It's really changed the way that I've thought about failure. Because in this case, when he talks about black box, he's not talking about think outside the box. He's talking about black boxes that are in airplanes. And he talks about how the airline industry has a learn from failure mentality. That is their culture, and how they've been able to make airline travel essentially, extremely safe now, one of the safest modes of transportation. And the reason why they did that is because they were explicit about learning from failure. So I want to come back to boss fights and talk and wrap up with this part, because I think one of the most important things about boss fights is to know when you're in one. And that sounds really trivial, but it actually took me about 30 years to realize that, because what would happen is I would be in a boss fight and it just felt like stress and anxiety to me, right? I was racked with anxiety, fear of failure, because failure was likely. But recently I've started to go, oh, wait a second, I'm in a boss fight. And then I get excited because I know that if I beat this boss fight, I'm going to level up. And this is something I see in Simi all the time. So Simi, as she mentioned at the beginning, she will reach out to exceptional difference when she's in a boss fight. And one of the things I love about Simi that she does better than anybody is she knows how to reach out. She knows how to get people involved. I admire that so much about her. But she'll reach out to us and she'll be in a boss fight and we'll chat. And then I might not see her for a couple of months. And so as soon as I turn on the Zoom and I see her, she's different. She just carries herself a different way. I can see that she has leveled up. And then the other thing about boss fights that, and I only realized this like in the past month, is that the boss is you. It's you. This is an internal struggle that you're having. And that's why if you focus on value, it forces your gaze outward and makes it clear what to do. If you use data as your armor in these boss fights, it gives you confidence and conviction. And when you have confidence, conviction, you can do anything. You can become the engineer you know you can and should be. So this is my journey. These were my insights from my journey. I know yours will be different, and I'm a long way down this journey, but I never want to be so far from my beginnings that I can't be of benefit to those coming behind me. When I look back to that story with Colonel Barnhart, that was sort of a seminal moment, but I chipped away at it and I eventually got his confidence and his faith in me. But the thing that worries me now is that when I look at the numbers, and I don't know if it's different in the UK and the US, but I think it's a global phenomenon, that the number of women entering the engineering field at the university and graduate levels has been declining for many years. And I think in about the past 5 years, it's become flat. So it stopped declining, but it's certainly not increasing. And to me, that's really alarming. And engineering is so pervasive in every part of our lives. I mean, there is software in your toaster, there's software, it drives your cars, it flies your airplanes. I mean, it's in every aspect. And women bring a unique perspective, and our perspective matters. Our perspective is important. And we have an obligation to mentor the women coming up behind us and to be role models and to encourage girls to enter into that field. So that's my challenge to you. We've got to be better mentors and role models. So I'm going to switch gears here for a second at the very end, because I actually have a request from you. So my company, Exceptional Difference, we do all kinds of different offerings. Our flagship program is the Exceptional Engineering Experience, where we cover sort of those obligations of engineering. What do you need to do to meet your obligations? And then we do deep dives. So we'll do deep dives on quality or technical debt. We do a lot of mentoring, coaching, data analysis, because I love data. But one of the ideas I'm intrigued about right now is the idea of maybe offering a woman's only version of the Exceptional Engineering Experience. And so one of the things I'd like to find out from you guys is what you think. Would you rather be in like a women's only version, or would you rather, go through co-ed training, and why? Because that would be just really useful to me, because I'm really trying to understand if this is something we should pursue or not. So that's really everything that I had today. And I'm sure we have tons of time for questions. So I just want to see if there's any questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. It's been incredible again hearing you. And I am really happy that I managed to find my way into your presentation. It will be one of the high points for me for sure. I think so. I have a few questions, and we're opening up the questions for all of our participants as well. Please use the Q&A tab to type in the questions that you would like to ask us. That would be brilliant. So I want to start from the beginning, really, and you're talking about the boss fights, and so I really like the boss fights and the representation of the big monster that you're fighting. And just moving on from that, I was wondering whether we build on that a little bit, and you will tell us a little bit, a few of kind of a highlight of those things where some of the skill set, the key skill set that was useful to you to count on in those moments when you were in the boss fights.
Yeah. So, being a team leader was a big boss fight, and being a team leader and then just sort of going through the quest of the project afterwards really helped me into my current boss fight, which is it really gave me the courage to start my own business. And, but to me, the things I really fall back on are value. I mean, when I find myself getting wrapped up in things, I think, okay, where's the value proposition? And that it just helps, it just provides focus. Like I said, it's the lens. It could be the value in what you're providing to your customer. It could be the value in that you're creating a culture of excellence on your team. But the value proposition is a big thing. Second, I always go for data. I mean, one of the in mentor sessions, one of the things I always hear from people is that I don't have any data, right? Mm-hmm. But people have a lot of what I call all or nothing thinking. I'm like, you might not have precise data, but that doesn't mean you don't have usable data. Mm. So, we always spend some time, and it's amazing just by looking at the data they do have, the conclusions you can draw from that information and really help to understand what the real situation is and where the real issues are.
Hmm. Yeah, good. So we have some other questions as well. We had a comment from Sharon about the percentage and the trend of women joining engineering. Women in engineering increased from 9 to 14% from 2012, but has plateaued from 2017. So that's exactly what you said, Julia. And really valuable to have safe places to grow as women. I think programs for women only will be a valued offering. So in answer to your question on that. We have another question from Alan. Can you give an example of a story of using data to change a debate?
Yeah. This is actually from my, one of the things that I've been proud of in my career is that in order to make a commitment you can keep, you have to have a realistic schedule, right? So you have to build a plan and get it approved by your management. And so I've always had my plans approved, but when I became that new team leader, one of the things that we had to develop was a 3-day training course. And so my manager was upset with my estimate. He said, because I just showed him summary data. He said, in my experience, it takes 10 hours to develop an hour of training. So I opened up my plan and I said, Rich, that's not going to get me through the dry run. I mean, this is an important customer. So we had planned a dry run with 6 people and 2 or 3 instructors to dry run the course. So, I said, but I'm happy to walk through my plan with you. And if you can see ways that I can go faster, that would be great. And, we did a cursory look and he approved my plan. And then we moved on to the real issue of the project, all the project issues and where I needed management support and things like that.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so I really like this, and I have discussed this in the past as well with you guys about the first sale is to yourself. So I was wondering if you wanted to give us an example of where you it might have been something where you worked on that, or an example of a real experience where you sold something to yourself you might not have been sold on from the beginning, and then you were able to make an impact following that.
Yeah, and this happens to me a lot. It happens to our students all the time. So there's a lot of things that we know intellectually. We'll talk about the economics of quality, right? And you know how much it costs to find and fix a defect, in an inspection or review versus test. But when you actually get your own data and you start to track it, it's the difference between thinking you know something and knowing you know something. So I just had a defect recently. We put out this field guide, the 100+ questions that you should ask to make sure you're developing a great plan. And someone just found a defect in it, right? It's a typo. It'll take me 2 minutes to fix, but now I've got to go to my designer because it's in some fancy format and she injects defects. So when I review it, I'm going to have to check everything. It's got to go into Ingram Sparks and then it's got to get updated on Amazon. So it's going to take me 10, 15 hours to fix this one typo. And stuff like that always gives me the conviction to do a better personal review, Like, so when I feel like I'm in a rush and I don't have time to do something, memories like that are what convince me, no, slow down and take the time.
Yeah, no, that's such a valuable thing as well. And you talked about failure in your presentation as well, and how we, getting over failure. But I think that it's really a mind shift.
Yes.
So I'm looking at failure as failure and catastrophe to actually looking at it from learning opportunity. So I was wondering whether you had some insights on how to make that mind shift happen for people who might be struggling with the thinking around failure.
I think, and this is something I even started on early in my career. One of the first things I did was implement a defect prevention program at IBM for about 3,000 engineers. So, I mean, the very first step is to decriminalize defects, which is much easier, which sounds easier than it actually is. But, at IBM, they had a lot of failures to get to where they could have productive defect prevention. So one of the things they would do is they'd have a quality goal. We want to reduce defects by 10%. So what would the engineers do? We'd bundle 10 defects into one, right? 10% reduction. And so what you need is, and this takes courage. This is the difference between thinking you know something and knowing you know something. You really have to decriminalize it and realize that if you don't, you're not going to see reality. People are going to give you the reality they think you want, right? So, IBM management wanted to see 10% reduction. We gave them that reality. Did things change in reality? Absolutely not.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is an interesting one, because I think we talk a lot about no blame culture and stuff like that, but I think that's probably links into that. Because if failure is something that everybody is afraid of, then obviously you will manipulate the data to look like, that can always be done.
Yes. Data is powerful, but it can also be misused.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so we've got another question from Daniela saying, thank you for such an amazing presentation. I'm coming from another male-dominated industry, medicine, where women are starting to have more of a voice. However, I felt that I have another calling and I also love data. So I thought of making a change. What would be your advice for someone trying to start out in the tech industry?
Well, I think there are lots of opportunities in the tech industry. So, and I think like the thing that you have to realize is, like, when I was talking about Quest, I was not just talking about skills, but domain knowledge. And I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in medical tech, medical record keeping. There's all kinds of things where your domain knowledge is invaluable. So, I think that if you wanted to make the switch, you could switch into those kinds of companies that are working on those kinds of products, because you would bring so much to the table. You wouldn't be leaving anything behind.
Yeah, and I think we've seen as well. I think we ran an in-person event and we found a lot of people who have made the switch. The conversation was about how people can bring their expertise from different areas, and they might not be directly tech-related industries, but valuable roles that then they can use into tech, and how that is actually an incredibly important part of how we build products, because tech is everywhere, like you said in your presentation as well.
Right. And I don't have a ton of contacts in England. Alan might have more, but like, I know, we've worked with Beckman Coulter, Respironics. We've worked with a lot of high-tech companies that are in the medical because they do life-critical systems. So quality, commitment, all that stuff is really, really important to them.
Okay, cool. So moving on, I have a question as well as there's a participant question as well about what helps you identifying a boss fight? How do you know you're in one?
Because you're not sleeping at night. I mean, Simi, how do you know when you're in one? It's just the overwhelming amount of stress. And it's because you're outside your comfort zone. You've taken on a big new challenge, or you're facing a challenge you've never faced before. So it's not clear, you can't just fall back on experience to know what to do next. But realizing it really did change my mindset from terrified to excited.
I think that I was listening to a talk on one of the TED Talks, and it says that we feel the same emotion when we're afraid than when we are excited. So it's actually the same physiological things happening with us. It's just a mindset difference. So you were saying almost the same thing, to say make the mindset shift, because you are in that state. Yes, we're feeling that. So instead of feeling anxiety, you're feeling excitement. It's the same thing, but yeah, it's very powerful. And yeah, I think that is extremely impactful. So I think that from our perspective, in terms of communities, I want to know your thoughts as well, Julia, because you have a lot of experience working with the industry and stuff, and by mentoring and coaching women as well, what are the common things that are in our way, that we put in our own way, internally, that stops women making the next step or going all the way in industries like tech and similar?
Yeah, I think we get in our way. I really do. I think it's our greatest strength and our greatest weakness, right? Because I think whatever your greatest strength is also your weakness. And I think that it's because I think we are emotional, we're internal. I mean, we think about how things feel. We think about how we impact other people, how we impact the world. I'm not saying that men don't feel that. I just think it's our first response, right? It's our native reaction. Like, we're nurturers. And so I think that we can get stuck in our heads sometimes. And so that's why the value thing helps me, because it helps me look outward. So I can still have my strength, but I can focus it in the right direction.
So would you say that in that kind of, in order to overcome that hurdle, look at the value and externalize?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. I've seen, I mean, it's really fun to mentor people with that, because when they're in that situation, you go, well, why are we doing this? And they'll change. They'll get animated. They'll get excited about what they're talking about. And I'll go, do that.
Yeah.
They're like, I get it.
Yeah. So
it just changes it. It's just like, boom, you change.
Yeah, I was also thinking in terms of the situation you explained in one of your teams, where there might be a difficult conversation or a difficult feedback that you have to give one of the team members. And would you say that kind of technique also helps in that kind of situations? Because again, in leadership, that is something you will have to do again and again.
I mean, that one in particular was really hard because Steve was not a junior person. He was senior to me. He'd actually been on the project longer than I had. He wasn't team leader because he was, I wasn't the first person to find out some of his issues. But so, I really was, when it was about me, I felt selfish. I actually felt selfish thinking that I had to deal with him, because I thought I was doing it just to make my life easier. Like, that's really, I wasn't that old. And that was my first instinct. And that's what I struggled with initially. And that's when it helped me to sort of role play and say, okay, now wait a second. What if I'm on this team and this guy's doing this at every meeting? What would I want the team leader to do? Not me, but what I want the team leader to do.
Yeah.
And that's when it became clear what had to be done.
Yeah, that's an excellent mind shift, actually, a really valuable technique. We also have a question from Kelly. She's saying, great presentation. Wanted to ask if there is ever a point when you have walked away from a boss fight. And if so, when should this be considered? With more than 50% of women likely to quit a tech career before 35, any advice you would give?
Yeah, I think there are some real boss fights out there that I didn't get into. I think work-life balance is a big one. I mean, I know in my career, again, your greatest strengths, greatest weakness, you know, I've focused on my family in the middle part of my career. You know, I was working part-time, and, you know, I put my career on the back burner many times. And, but I also got to reinvent myself. I always kept my hand in it. I always kept my foot in it so that I could always come back, and I got to do completely different things. But there are times when you're up against sexual harassment, you're against work-life balance, things that just really aren't fair. And this is why it's so important for us to mentor each other, because we have to get in those positions. We're not vulnerable like that anymore. Like, we absolutely have to. We have to level the playing field. And like the bottom line, the thing I wanted to say about women's empowerment and through this whole talk is that people don't empower you. You have to empower yourself, right? It's mindset. You empower yourself, and we have to empower ourselves so we get in these positions and we can protect each other.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think one of the things that behind the Women in Tech Dorset community as well is that we are creating that support system around ourselves that is lifting us up, and having role models such as yourself speaking to us and sharing your guidance with us as well. So lastly, just if you would like to share some thoughts on the value of community around especially women in tech and generally as well to push us forward, and what are some of the things that it can help us achieve? What are some of the things we should be mindful of?
I mean, there are battles that I still fight. You know, when we started this and you were talking about, oh, I look at myself in the Zoom, I'm like, I do that too. And I think so many times as women, when we are facing something, we feel like we're the only ones that have that. And so, you know, I know that when I talk to women and I'm working in mentoring, just the acknowledgement that, no, I feel that way too. It's that support and that sense of community, and just knowing that you're not alone and that you're not the only one facing the kinds of issues that we face. So I think it's that support system. It's that shared understanding, the shared experiences, and the perspective that we bring to each other that only another woman can bring to you. That's so critical. That's what keeps you going. That's what, you know, boosts you up when you most need it. So I'm a big supporter. I really think that, I think women are, you know, I gotta say, maybe it's just because so few of them go in, and so we're just getting the best of the best, but women make such good engineers. I'm always amazed. I think that we just have some natural instincts in how we've evolved to this point that just make us really good technical engineers.
Fantastic. Okay, this is all come to an end. I wish to keep talking to you forever, Julia. As you know, I think that conversation will never end. But thank you so much for your time and for sharing everything, your insights with us. It's been extremely, again, you know, a pure pleasure to have you on board. And thank you for spending this time with us. And hopefully we'll see you again in one of our other webinar or online events, if not in person. Yeah, wonderful to speak to you again.
All right. Thanks, Simi. I appreciate it. It was fun.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.